Andrew Jackson is one of those historical figures that we've talked about on this channel before. He is widely considered to be one of the founders of modern American democracy, but at the same time, he was also a slave owner who presided over the forced relocation of thousands of Native Americans and signed the Indian Removal Act into law. So, what did Andrew Jackson actually do? And why is he both praised and criticized so much by historians today? Let's find out. It's me. This is Crash Course in U.S. History. Before we get into it, I just want to say thank you to some supporters for asking this question. We get hundreds of questions every month asking us to do an episode about Andrew Jackson. And while I totally understand why people are curious about him, I've been hesitant to do an episode about him because there's a lot to unpack and I didn't want to misrepresent his legacy in any way. So your comments really helped me to see how we can talk about his presidency fairly and accurately. Also, if you have a question you'd like to ask, please go ahead and send it to us at the end of each episode. When we last saw the United States, John Quincy Adams had just become president after defeating Andrew Jackson in the election of 1824. Now, to be clear, no one was really happy with the results of the election of 1824. Real animosity was between Jackson and William Crawford, who each thought they should have won. After all, neither candidate had secured a majority of the Electoral College vote, which meant that the election was thrown into the House of Representatives, where eventually John Quincy Adams won. Many Americans were confused as to how Adams could win when he received fewer votes than Jackson. To them, it looked like a corrupt bargain between Adams and Clay. Now, the word corrupt might seem like a weird choice here, but this was the first time in American history that such a transfer of power had happened. And people weren't sure if it was a good thing or not. At the end of the day, John Quincy Adams became president and served one term, during which he worked hard to establish a strong national bank and strengthen the federal government. In the end, though, his efforts failed and he lost to Andrew Jackson in the election of 1828. By the 1820s, many Americans had come to believe that the elite class that had been running the country since the beginning were unfit to lead the nation forward. And many felt like the new middle class that had grown up in the early republic were being left out of political decision-making. So when Jackson, a man who started out as a poor farmer and worked his way up, won the election, it was seen as a sign that perhaps the nation was changing. Jackson won in part by appealing to the common man, and he kept up this persona throughout his 2 terms in office. He made himself available to average citizens, shaking hands and greeting people on the street. He hosted a public dinner in the White House with 1,000 guests. He believed in expanding suffrage to more white men, not only because he genuinely believed that more people should have the right to vote, but also because he hoped that they would vote for him. And this wasn't the only populist move that Jackson made during his presidency. Jackson was also very sensitive to the rights of property owners and believed that the federal government had an obligation to protect them from the perceived threats of the Second Bank of the United States and the tariff. The National Bank, which had been established in 1816, was designed to manage the nation's finances and regulate currency. It was overseen by a board of directors and was largely supported by wealthy elites who saw it as a way to further their economic interests. The tariff was designed to protect American businesses from foreign competition by imposing taxes on imported goods. However, the problem was that these tariffs often benefited northern industrialists at the expense of southern planters. In other words, the bank and the tariff seemed to Jackson and many others to be ways that the rich and powerful were using the federal government to benefit themselves at the expense of everyday citizens. And as far as Jackson was concerned, enough was enough. In vetoing the renewal of the Second Bank of the United States and fighting the nullification crisis over the tariff, Jackson was championing the rights of the people against the elite few. That is, after all, what the Democratic Party, which Jackson helped to found, was all about. And while Jackson is praised for expanding democracy and protecting the rights of property owners, he is also criticized for using the presidency to advance his own personal agenda and for discriminating against minority groups. That's because while Jackson did support expanding voting rights to more white men, He was also responsible for the forced removal of thousands of Native Americans and signing the Indian Removal Act into law. The forced relocation of Native Americans began under President John Quincy Adams with the passage of the Indian Removal Act of 1830, which gave the president authority to negotiate treaties with Native American tribes in order to relocate them west of the Mississippi River. The idea was that Native Americans could either assimilate to American culture or they would be forced out of their lands, which white Americans could then use for plantations or for industry. Under Jackson, 5 tribes were forcibly relocated in what would become known as the Trail of Tears. Tens of thousands of Native Americans were removed from their homelands in Georgia, North Carolina, Tennessee, Alabama, and Missouri and forced to march across the United States to new reservations west of the Mississippi. Thousands died of starvation and disease before ever reaching their destination. And that is undoubtedly a dark chapter of American history. But to truly understand Jackson's impact on American democracy, we need to look beyond his dealings with Native Americans and consider what he did and did not accomplish in office. First, let's talk about what he accomplished. Jackson believed in the power of the people and wanted to make sure that they were heard in the halls of government. To that end, he created the modern political party system by establishing the Democratic Party, which focused on issues that appealed to the common man. He also reduced the national debt during his presidency, expanded suffrage to more white men, and made the president's office more accessible to average citizens. However, there is another side to this coin because while Jackson did champion the rights of the people, he also used the presidency to advance his own personal agenda. For example, Jackson was a staunch opponent of the national bank and the tariff, which he saw as a way for the rich and powerful to control the government. He vetoed the renewal of the Second Bank of the United States and fought the nullification crisis over the tariff, even though both of these were popular with many Americans. Jackson also appointed people to his cabinet based on their loyalty to him rather than their qualifications for the job. And he used the presidential veto more frequently than all presidents combined. In other words, Jackson was a true original when it came to using the presidency to advance his personal agenda. On the one hand, this was a break from the past because previous presidents had been relatively passive in the face of congressional authority. On the other hand, though, this set a dangerous precedent for future presidents who might want to use the office to pursue their own interests at the expense of the people. So let's just take a minute to recap. Jackson was a man of the people who became president and used the office to advance his own personal agenda. He expanded democracy while at the same time trampling the rights of Native Americans. He championed the rights of property owners while at the same time destroying the national bank, which many Americans depended on for economic stability. In other words, Jackson was a complex man whose actions had both positive and negative consequences for American democracy. And it's this complexity that makes him such an interesting figure in American history. When we think about Andrew Jackson today, it's easy to focus on the negative aspects of his legacy, such as his role in the forced removal of Native Americans. And there's a lot to criticize him for. At the same time, though, it's important to remember that Jackson was a product of his time and that he accomplished many things that advanced American democracy. As we move forward in this course, we'll continue to explore the complexities of American history and the people who shaped it. And we hope that you'll join us on that journey. Thanks for watching this episode, which was filmed at a studio and made with the help of all these nice people. If you want to help keep this content free for everyone forever, you can join our community on a crowdfunding platform.